Welcome to the Debka File, a weekly roundup of exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East, broadcast to you live from the heart of the region. Coming up on the program today, the Khashoggi mystery and its fallout. A Hamas terror tunnel destroyed as balloon terror hits Jerusalem. A Russian hoax hid a missile ambush lurking for U.S. and Israeli jets over Syria. Putin is twisting Netanyahu's arm before making military deals. And now to our top headlines. Was the Khashoggi case a murder, an action against the Saudi crown prince, or a plot to destroy U.S.-Saudi relations? No one really knows what happened to the prominent Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi after he disappeared inside the Saudi consulate on October 2nd. Turkish intelligence officials claim to have a video showing Saudi agents murdering Khashoggi in the consulate building. They also claim to have proof that 15 Saudi agents were involved in the murder and that they flew the journalist's remains back to Saudi Arabia. However, Turkey has not shown any proof to support its claims. U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton made a statement on October 11th saying, quote, "We need to find out what the facts are, and we need to get this resolved quickly, because if it is another operation, people need to understand that." Florida Senator Marco Rubio had this response to the journalist's disappearance.
Our moral credibility, our ability to call Putin a murderer because he is, our ability to call Assad a murderer because he is, our ability to confront Maduro in Venezuela or any of these other human rights atrocities like what we see in China, all of that is undermined and compromised if we somehow decide that because an ally who's important did that, we're not going to call it out. So I will just say this to you with full confidence. If this is proven to be true, there is going to be a response from Congress. It's going to be nearly unanimous. It's going to be swift. And it's going to go pretty far. And that could include arms sales, but it could include a bunch of other things as well.
Riyadh responded on Sunday with this statement by an unnamed Saudi official. Quote, "The kingdom confirms that if any action is taken against it, it will respond to it by a greater action." According to a Turkish presidential source, the affair showed its first signs of nearing a conclusion when King Salman and Turkish President Erdogan spoke by phone early Monday to shed light on the case. Debka File sources note that the full content of the deal between the two rulers may never see the light of day. However, the Saudi monarch has clearly set his priorities, which are to eliminate the source of the international scandal, such as Turkey, to punish Washington for not coming to Saudi's aid, and to come to terms with the political turmoil in Riyadh surrounding his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Debka File experts state that the disappearance of dissenters to the throne is nothing new in Saudi Arabia and has been occurring under previous Saudi reigns. In 2003, Prince Sultan bin Turki was abducted in Geneva after calling for reforms in the kingdom. In 2015, Prince Turki bin Bandar al Saud was abducted in Paris. Last November, Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri disappeared after being invited to Riyadh by the Crown Prince. He was later freed after French President Emmanuel Macron intervened, and only after he agreed to transfer his entire fortune of $7 billion to the Saudi treasury. Jamal Khashoggi was a mild critic of the Saudi government who sometimes even praised the social reforms introduced by the Crown Prince. Therefore, it seems that the reporting about Saudi intelligence assassins executing Khashoggi after following orders from the Crown Prince should be treated with caution. A possible palace conspiracy by the prince's rivals at home who oppose his reformist policies or resent him as the king's favorite son cannot be ignored. Debka sources reveal that Turkish President Erdogan despises the Saudi royal family and the crown prince, so the journalist could be a victim of a conspiracy set up by Turkish forces to paint the crown prince in a negative light. It's also possible that U.S. and Western undercover agents who are dedicated to the downfall of U.S. President Trump collaborated on an effort to undermine the Saudi crown prince and destroy ties between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. On Thursday, U.S. President Trump stated that U.S. investigators in Turkey will probe the case.
Yes, we're looking at it. We're looking at it very strongly. We'll be having a report out soon. We're working with Turkey. We're working with Saudi Arabia. What happened is a terrible thing, assuming that happened. I mean, maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised, but somehow I tend to doubt it, and we take it very seriously.
Trump's peace plan of the century for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian dispute could also be in jeopardy, as Saudi Arabia is a key player in the deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu has also cultivated strong ties with the Saudi crown prince. These questions will continue to be explored as the investigation moves forward. With us to discuss this is Professor Alan Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds and a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So what are the ramifications of the Khashoggi affair on U.S.-Saudi relations, and do you think this could be the end of the friendship between Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Jared Kushner?
I think we first have to start by having great skepticism about the veracity either of the Turkish government or of the Saudi government. These are not people who are trustworthy. Erdogan, we know, is a liar, a bigot. We know that he's totally untrustworthy, and we shouldn't start with the presumption that he or his government is telling you the truth. We shouldn't start with the presumption that the Saudis are telling you the truth. These are both governments that have imprisoned journalists, that have murdered journalists. There is no good on either side. And so what we have to do is look to the facts and look to the evidence. If the evidence in the end establishes two things, number one, that Khashoggi was killed, and that's where the evidence is looking, and second, that he was killed at the direct instructions of the Saudi government, and we have to know who in the Saudi government because it's not a united government, then, of course, we have to take action. Look, the United States doesn't deal only with nice people who do nice things. We have allies all over the world who kill journalists and who do horrible, horrible things. And the United States has to look to its own self-interest, to the interests of its allies, including Israel. This is not something that should just be allowed to pass without investigations. But we also shouldn't be focusing exclusively on this issue because he's a Washington Post reporter, was American. He doesn't have a perfect record either. I mean, he's somebody who threw himself into the mix. He had relationships with the Muslim Brotherhood. He's played both ends against the middle. So this is a complicated matter, and I think we have to wait to see where the evidence ultimately lands.
How do you think this will impact the Trump administration's Middle East policies and the Israel-Palestinian peace initiative, in which the Saudis have played an active role and continue to play an active role?
Well, I think it's very important that the United States maintain a relationship with those in Saudi Arabia who want to help facilitate peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The entire peace plan that Jared Kushner and others have been working on really depends on the Sunni Arabs showing support, and they have shown support up to now. And the peace plan is more important than the life of any one individual, as important as that life might be. You know, in diplomacy, we don't follow the Talmud that he who takes even a single human life, it's as if they took the entire world. We're more likely to follow the advice of Stalin, that when you kill one person, it's a tragedy. When you kill many, it's a statistic. And so we have to avoid becoming overly sentimental about this. We have to obviously focus hard on our commitment to human rights, but we have to look beyond this issue. If the Saudis can help bring about peace in the Middle East, if the Turks can do a little bit of tshuva and maybe come back into the fold. They have served the interests not of peace, but of hegemony in their own region. These are generally not good players, and we have to get used to using not good players, perhaps to produce some good results.
So this morning, the latest news is that the Turkish President Erdogan spoke with King Salman in a secret phone call. Do you think a deal is in the making? And do you think we can expect a joint Turkish-Saudi statement for ending this crisis?
Oh, I think there'll be a deal. Look, remember there was a deal between the Turks and the Israelis over the boat, the boarding of the boat. Deals are usually how these matters end. The Turks, the Saudis have also allowed the Turks to come into the embassy and do their own forensic investigation. They will find nothing, obviously. You know, the Saudis, if they did kill this guy, did it unbelievably stupidly. They could so easily have arranged for him to leave the embassy, taken a video of him leaving the embassy, and then abducted him and brought him back. That way they would have had some proof of him leaving the embassy. But the idea that there is a video of him entering the embassy and nothing leaving the embassy raises some serious questions. Of course, the Turks claim they have video and audio. I don't believe that for a minute. If that were to be the case, I think they would release them. Look, in the end, we may not know exactly what happened. We may have to simply infer from what we know what likely happened. And when you have that kind of uncertainty, when we practically know probably what happened, but there isn't forensic proof, that's when deals can be made.
So let's turn now to Israel. Do you think this could have far-reaching repercussions on Israel's ties to Saudi Arabia, which have been increasingly getting better over the past couple of months and years?
Look, there have been so many blips in the relationship. The relationship is based on self-interest on both sides. And I do think that in the end, it can be patched up. Look, remember, many of the Sunni countries blamed Israel for assassinations. Now, there's no comparison between assassinating terrorists who are planning to kill your people and assassinating a journalist. There's no comparison at all. But from the point of view of the Sunni Arabs, they don't think Israel has a perfect record, and yet they're prepared to deal with Israel to a degree in order to serve their own self-interest. So in the end, self-interest will prevail. There'll be a lot of posturing about human rights, about the rights of journalists. All of that will happen, and it should happen. But in the end, self-interest will prevail.
And how do you think this will impact the balance of power in Riyadh and in the entire region?
Well, it depends on how the United States reacts. If the United States imposes punitive sanctions and the Saudis then impose rise in oil prices, there could be some catastrophic impact on the world economy. I mean, there was some suggestion in an op-ed that oil prices could be driven up to $200 a barrel. The effect on the economy itself, the stock market in the last week or so has had its real ups and downs. It's very vulnerable. I think President Trump is very anxious to keep the stock market high and the economy roaring, particularly as we approach the midterm election. So I think all of these factors will enter into considerations as to how the United States will deal with the Saudis, how Israel will deal with the Saudis. In the end, I think it's in everybody's interest to try to patch the relationship and use the Saudis as part of the solution, not part of the problem, to the ongoing Middle East crisis involving Syria, involving Iran. Let's remember, in the end, Iran and Syria are so important, and the Saudis have such a major stake in constraining radicalism by Iran and by Russia's involvement in Syria and Russia's involvement with Hezbollah. Israel lives in a very complicated and dangerous place, and it has to put its existential interests before anything else.
You spoke previously about the legitimacy of the Turkish government. Do you think, with all the conspiracy theories out there, that there might actually be a conspiracy, and by whom?
Well, I don't think we're going to find a smoking gun. We're not going to see a movie script. This is not going to be Homeland of Fauda. I think what we're going to see is around the edges, probably some exaggerations. It is conceivable that we may see that there was this murder, but it wasn't authorized at the highest levels, or what we might see that it was authorized by the highest levels, but they'll find a scapegoat to blame that will take responsibility away from the prince. There are so many possible resolutions here because of the state of the evidence and the state of diplomacy in the Middle East.
Why do you think the media has gone into such a frenzy over this particular case when the truth is, as you mentioned before, the Turkish government is not to be trusted. These abductions and disappearances are standard in both Turkey and the Saudi kingdom.
Oh, I think we have a face attached to it. And the face is that of a Washington Post journalist, somebody who was about to get married. He was going to the embassy to get papers. When you attach a face to a victim, it becomes very, very different than another journalist killed or another journalist has disappeared. I mean, part of what journalism tries to do is give face, particularly to journalists. But this one kind of naturally had its own face. We have the fiancé writing op-ed pieces. He's become humanized, and we can all identify with him. I think that's why this has taken on a very different kind of characteristic from other more, quote, statistical cases.
Do you have any final thoughts about the issue?
Well, I do think in the end, diplomacy will trump. I remember when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was criticized for working with a despot in the Caribbean. And Roosevelt said, sure, he's a despot, but he's our despot. And, you know, we've had relationships with bad people, bad countries. You know, we're selective. The left is okay when we have relationships with the Chinese. The right is okay when we have relationships with the Polish and other right-wingers. I think we need a universal standard of human rights where we don't give a pass to either side, but we put these issues in a proper perspective. And I do think that in the end, that will probably happen.
That's Professor Alan Dershowitz. Thank you very much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Israeli troops shot down a Palestinian gang of 20 Hamas commandos, which crossed into Israel and blew a hole in the fence near central Gaza. 14,000 Gazans mobbed the border fence, hurling explosives, grenades, and rocks at Israeli soldiers. Meanwhile, the IDF destroyed its 15th Hamas terror tunnel, which ran 200 meters into Israel and was wired with electricity and telephone links. Debka military sources reveal that the IDF has known about the tunnel for several months, but delayed its destruction in order to complete negotiations with Hamas. They wanted to receive assurance that the tunnel's destruction would not cause a missile attack on Israeli targets. This operation will not impact the daily war waged by Palestinian mobs sending explosives across the border or the violent campaigns that Hamas is waging on Israel. These include the recent balloon bombs sent into Israel, such as the bomb inside a cardboard container shaped like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which landed in the Israeli Eshkol Council. One of the balloons that landed behind the Knesset contained explosives. These balloons are being upgraded by Hamas to start taking lives and not just destroying property. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had this to say at a cabinet meeting.
בחמאס כנראה לא הפנימו את המסר. אם הם לא יפסיקו את ההתקפות האלימות נגדנו, הן יופסקו בדרך אחרת, והיא תהיה כואבת, כואבת מאוד. אנחנו קרובים מאוד לפעילות מסוג אחר, פעילות שתכלול מכות עוצמתיות מאוד. אם יש לו שכל, החמאס יפסיק את האש ואת ההתפרעויות האלימות עכשיו.
In other Gaza news, although Israeli politicians are going back and forth about a two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the U.S., Israel, Egypt, and Qatar are beginning to construct a new two-state solution. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas has not commented on the fuel delivery to Gaza. His threat to stop all payments to the Gaza Strip has received a counter-threat by Israel to cover the shortfall of funds by diverting all the money collected for the PA in Ramallah to Gaza. Since the accidental downing of the Il-20 Russian air crash on September 17th, Moscow has been putting together missiles designed to take down the U.S. F-22 and Israeli F-35 stealth planes over Syria. Debka sources say there are 3 steps in this process. First, Moscow told U.S. advisor to Syria, James Jeffrey, that a new Syria deal with Washington was available and welcomed him to Moscow to discuss the new plan. Second, Netanyahu was persuaded not to be alarmed by President Vladimir Putin. These steps were a hoax to distract attention away from the Russian Defense Ministry's assembly of a defense missile system in Syria. Several S-300 batteries were shipped to Syria with the purpose of convincing U.S. and Israeli Air Force commands not to play games with Russia. Russian officials spoke of 4 to 8 S-300 batteries being shipped to Syria, but that was untruthful information. Last Monday, 3 full battalion sets of S-300 systems, each set armed with 300 anti-air missiles with 24 launchers, were delivered. The Russian National Army was compensated with new S-400s as well. A deal between Moscow and Tehran included the transfer of Iranian teams into Syria in exchange for landing rights at West Iranian air bases used for Russian bombers and freight planes bound for Syria. Moscow's plan was created immediately following the Il-20 plane accident, and Putin took advantage of the situation to launch his next strategy in Syria. Until this was revealed, U.S. and Israeli Air Force units were unaware of the advanced capabilities of upgraded Russian weaponry sent to Syria. Whereas the S-300 missiles target high-flying planes, Debka Weekly has discovered that Russia has secretly deployed two missile systems, the Panzer 21E and Pekora M2S, which are designed to attack low-flying aircraft. Last Monday, Netanyahu expressed hope that he will soon meet with Putin. But on the same day, Moscow announced its delivery of 3 battalion sets of S-300 air defense systems to Syria. Netanyahu also announced that Israel would not give up its permanent sovereignty over the Golan. He expressed confidence that President Putin understands Israel's need to maintain sovereignty in the region. On Wednesday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov refuted Netanyahu by stating that the status of the Golan is determined by the resolutions of the UN Security Council. Changing the status would be a direct violation of these resolutions. Intelligence advisors have warned Netanyahu that Putin does not intend to honor his promises when it comes to Israel's security. Netanyahu, however, believes he can convince Putin to stand up for Israel on issues of national security. Advisors state that Putin will never compromise on his country's strategic interests for the sake of Israel's. The U.S. did not interfere when Russia sent S-300 air defense missiles to Syria. The head of the U.S. Central Command, General Joseph Votel, called the missile deliveries a needless escalation, but did not do anything to stop it from taking place. Netanyahu understands the heightened risk to Israeli jets since the Russian S-300 and other cutting-edge air defense systems have entered Syria. Iran is also using this time to ship precision missiles to Syria in order to replace the supplies that Israel destroyed. Last Monday, former Russian ambassador to Damascus, Alexander Zotov, stated that Israel needs to understand the risk in carrying out operations without coordination with Russia. Moscow is now working on a new plan that puts Israel in a different position in regards to Putin's overall strategy. Putin wants to make sure that Israel is working on his terms before discussing military coordination with Israel. That's all for this week's edition of the Debka File. We'll be back with you next week for more exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East. Make sure to check out our Facebook page @IsraelEnglishNews and our website, iltv.tv. I'm Yael Shir, and thanks for watching.